Hi, just jumping in here with a really quick note about this interview. It was recorded on August 21st. It's with Lisa Selin Davis, and we talk about her work having to do with the new gender movement, various policies that have gone or are going into effect around these issues. On August 27th, of course, there was a horrific shooting in Minneapolis at a Catholic school. The shooter was pretty quickly found to have had some kind of trans identification. I had to record a bunch of episodes ahead of time, so it might seem a little bit weird to be hearing this conversation with no mention of that incident. That's why on August 28th, I did a live stream with Ben Appel about the Minneapolis situation specifically. So if you're interested in hearing that, I will link to it in the show notes. I had to do it in my car because I got stuck in Los Angeles. But nonetheless, it's a great conversation, as is this one with Lisa Selin Davis. Enjoy.
Ultimately, what happened was that we made it impossible to object, that we made objection, questioning, skepticism into a kind of blasphemy, especially the way social media and social justice commingled to narrow us down to the oppressor and the oppressed and good or bad, black and white. In order to understand this issue, as I said in the beginning, you would have to say every democratic institution was wrong. And then you would have to also say the words that are absolutely impossible in this environment for a liberal to say, which are the Republicans are right about this.
Welcome to the Unspeakable Podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Daum. My guest is writer and journalist Lisa Selin Davis. She has joined me several times over the past 5 years to talk about one of our favorite topics around here and one of the most fraught issues of our time. I would say probably the most fraught. That is pediatric gender medicine. When this podcast launched in 2020, very few people outside a small circle of specialists and parents even knew what gender-affirming care meant. Now, even though a lot of people still don't know exactly what that means, the lawsuits are coming fast and furious, clinics are closing, and a lot of stuff is happening. And yet, the conversation remains incredibly polarized and often not as complex as it really should be. That is why Lisa's work is so important. She has been covering this subject rigorously and with just incredible respect for nuance and detail. She has a forthcoming book that asks not only what happened when it comes to this subject, but how it happened and why so many good liberals found themselves participating in what is arguably the major medical scandal of our time, the biggest medical scandal, depending on how you look at the history of medicine. In this conversation, we talk about how far the discourse has shifted, what counts as knowledge versus dogma, and why even the critics, the gender critical folks, sometimes fall into their own contradictions. As you've heard me say before, Lisa will be a speaker at our Unspeakeasy Small Gathering for Big Ideas co-ed retreat, October 11th and 12th in New York City. We are currently at capacity, so that is waitlist only. If you want to get on the waitlist for that, you can go to theunspeakeasy.com/NYC. And before we get going, a couple points of correction for all you nitpickers out there. At one point, Lisa refers to E.M. Forster's book about fiction, about novels. She calls it The Art of the Novel. It's actually called Aspects of the Novel. I thought it was called The Art of Fiction for some reason. It's Aspects of the Novel. And the second thing is, after that whole conversation a few weeks ago with John McWhorter, where I was railing about people who get you and I, confused when they say you and I versus you and me, I made that mistake. I said you and I when I should have said you and me. So I stand corrected. Despite those things, this is a great interview. So if you can overlook those two gaffes, I think you're going to really get a lot out of this. So here's Lisa Selin Davis. Lisa, welcome back to the podcast.
What an honor to be back.
I don't know how many times you've been on now, but it seems relevant to say that I think you were on maybe 2020, definitely 2021, talking about gender. I've been talking about this subject since the beginning of the podcast in 2020. So it's been 5 years since I've been talking about it, 4 years at least since you and I first spoke about it. I know that you've been writing about this rigorously and prolifically, and you have a book coming out sometime next year. Why don't we just start by you talking about where we're at in terms of this issue? Are people better informed than they were certainly 5 years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago? What's the timeline?
I do think when you and I started talking, you had a few people who knew a lot about it and a lot of people who had a feeling that something was not right, but had no information and no reason to object, because to object to the narrative about trans kids and gender affirming care is to say that you know more than the SPLC, the ACLU, HRC.
The SPLC, meaning the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Oh, yes, which has declared all the groups that object to this. They're all hate groups, which we'll get into later, including this group SEGM, the Society for Evidence.
Okay, I don't know why we're turning to the Southern Poverty Law Center when it comes to gender, but okay,
because they're part of telling people what it's acceptable to say or believe. So in order to object to this, you had to launch yourself beyond all of the liberal institutions and say, yeah, all of these, this is not a conspiracy theory, but every institution you believe in is lying to you.
Yeah, it's really hard. And the medical organizations.
And the medical organizations and the New York Times, right? It's almost impossible to believe. Now, all these years later, you have many more people who understand things like there's very low certainty evidence for these medical interventions, and that gender identity is an idea, not a fact, and that trans kids are created through the interventions. They are a way of responding to somebody's feelings or senses of themselves, but they're not born. You have all these people that understand those talking points. But as I said before we started, there's that saying, I have no idea who said it originally, that a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. So you have a much broader audience with still a shallow understanding.
One of the things people seem to hold on to, and I probably do a little bit as well, not as much as I used to, is this notion that there's a very teeny tiny percentage of kids who are quote unquote the real thing. They are actually trans, and an intervention in childhood would theoretically help them. Now, the problem is that we don't know which kids those are, but this idea that they exist in very, very small numbers was something that I was willing to give credence to until pretty recently. And now I'm getting close to saying, you're right, this is a concept, and therefore a concept is not a material reality.
Well, what happened to shift you?
I don't know that I have officially shifted as much as I am willing to see the perhaps naivete in that position. I do know of kids that transitioned pretty young and are happier, or are happy. I don't know if they're happier than they would have been, but appear to be thriving.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do with that information.
I also know some of those kids, or know of some of those kids. And if we are declaring people have been harmed because of self-report, that is, they're unhappier, as opposed to the medical harm. But if we are declaring psychological harm, because of what they're saying, then we have to hold next to that the people saying, this has made me so happy. This is really working for me. And I don't think if you're trying to make an argument about this one way or another, if it needs to stop or it needs to continue, it would be, you make a stronger argument if you take all sides into account. Now, we have no idea if the kids who are thriving would still be thriving without these interventions, because we don't have those sliding doors kind of movies to peek in. We do know that from the beginning of doing this in the Netherlands and starting in the very late 80s, early 90s, that there was a conflation between the young children who were upset and the adult, usually trans women, transsexual women,
Biological males
who transitioned and couldn't pass as women,
right.
And that they reported that they could not thrive because of that. They had high suicide rates, high rates of psychological problems. And there was an assumption that those were the same populations, which I highly doubt they were, but it's not, you can't tell completely. And that in general, the kids, as we know now, those young kids, almost all the kids in those original studies in the Netherlands that launched pediatric gender medicine were same-sex attracted. This is old news to you. Most of them, from everything we know from 12 long-term studies starting in the 70s, if not socially transitioned, would have been grown up to be gay. And that the adults were probably in this other cohort, which we shouldn't get too much into, of autogynephiles, but just a different kind of person. And it doesn't mean that the adults were wrong, that had they transitioned early and been able to pass, that maybe they would have been happier later. It just means they were probably clinically different populations, right, and had a different reason for being distressed about their sexed body or the category they were operating in. So there's been bad science, I think, from the beginning. But the question remains of how much that matters. Because we have people who are happy they transitioned, adults who are happy they transitioned, kids who are happy, and we have people whose lives are completely devastated by it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we make policy based on any of this. I don't know how we come to a resolution. But all I see around me are people who started as, this isn't all I see around me, but I see a lot of people who started as disaffected liberals or started with that seed of something's wrong, got that knowledge to confirm the feeling, yes, something is wrong, and then got somewhat radicalized.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say radicalized, do you mean they've sort of gone to the extreme in the other direction, or they're just more willing to speak up?
All right. Well, this will be alienating to some people, but that's fine. It's hard for me to believe that anybody can unfailingly support Trump without being radicalized in some way. So maybe that's a failing on my part. That if you are rah-rahing behind everything he does without questioning him the way you might have questioned Biden or the Democrats, then I consider that to be a kind of radicalization.
Okay, so but I just want to pause for a second. So your definition of radicalization would be this kind of like black pill moment, or even like very, very severe red pill moment where like everything is broken. We need the institutions have failed us, en masse, at mass scale, and we need to, sort of tear it all down in order to build something new. Is that kind of how you're framing this?
If that's how it's framed, I can understand making that choice. What I'm concerned about are the people who refuse to critique Trump. I will critique both sides equally. That is the gift of heterodoxy or political homelessness, whatever you want to call it. What I see are people who used to believe unfailingly in the Democrat-led institutions now believing unfailingly in Trump and not applying the same skepticism.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like I don't know those people. I feel like the closest I get is people say, I don't like him. I don't like his personality. He's distasteful, but this is the person in this role and this is how it was meant to be. And if he is the kind of agent of this kind of change, I will hold my nose and get through it. I mean, those are the people that I know. I mean, yes, there's definitely like the MAGA base, which perhaps that's what you're talking about. Is that who you're referring to?
About the people who left liberalism because it was illiberal and went to MAGA.
Okay.
Well, MAGA.
So, but they would call themselves MAGA liberals. And I don't mean to get hung up on this. We'll go back to gender in a second. But I just want to clarify, because I think people listening are probably going to say like, wait, what do you mean? Because, just as there are so many different cohorts in the gender conversation, and that's so key, I think, to getting people to understand. I think there's a lot of different cohorts in the Trump world.
Definitely. I mean, what a diverse coalition. They've got diversity.
Yeah, that's how they got elected. So
they got a lot of diversity. Well, let's move it. Let's change the framing slightly. Trump has put a stop, at least temporarily, to some things. So through his executive orders, which cut off funding, much the way I have to say, Biden had a slew of executive orders that threatened to cut off funding for instance, schools that did not protect gender identity. So for people who are aghast that Trump would do that, well, the Democrats did it. You had to declare fealty to the idea of gender identity to get your money before. Now you have to declare fealty to reality.
And is this something that every state was doing? I did not realize that Biden actually had executive orders saying that schools had to affirm. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah. There was even a point where the same thing of, threatening to withhold money that would go to subsidized lunches if you did not have anti-discrimination policies related to gender identity.
Okay, but was this taking place in every state? I mean, because we often hear like Washington State is definitely that way, for instance. California is definitely that way, but is Alabama doing that? Did they just not take the money? Like, how did that go?
Well, I don't know how much it was enforced.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that they deployed resources the way the Trump administration is to police whether or not people were doing it. But I do think that gender identity teachings became common even in red states.
Okay.
They're teaching it plenty here in New York City. My kids got an amazing lesson about myths and facts about gender identity. Gender identity changes. Myth, you choose your gender identity.
You don't choose it. You're born with the identity.
Yeah, that's what they're teaching as fact. So definitely and in New York State, it's in our state constitution that you cannot discriminate, et cetera, based on gender identity. So it really depends on who wants to go to court over what, whether this will stop. But interestingly, many gender clinics folded because of the threat to withhold Medicaid reimbursements. And that also was just a threat, right? We don't know that he would have done it. So I thought that was interesting because I wondered how many of these clinics were closing because they had been searching for an off-ramp and Trump provided that off-ramp. I get to blame him and not be the bad guy and not say, the evidence is weak. We're hearing about people getting hurt. We don't have any way we don't even know what it means when we say it works. We don't know what we're treating, and we don't know how to measure harm. Let's put a pause on this and get some follow up with some patients, which is what I always wanted to happen. Now, instead of saying that, they get to say Trump made us do it. Trump is also not saying let's follow up with every patient, although now they're subpoenaing the records, but that's for criminal investigations. That's because they want to investigate providers for evidence of fraud and criminal activity.
In your reporting, did you talk to a lot of clinicians and others at these clinics who were saying this kind of thing? What percentage of them remain true believers?
Oh, very, very few of the people who were really hardcore into it have come forward. You've talked to a couple of them, Laura Edwards-Leeper, Erica Anderson, but they still believe to some extent, right? They were never in like these other kind of notorious clinicians like Johanna Olsen Kennedy or Diane Arensaf.
Right. I have not had Erica Anderson on the podcast, by the way. I had Laura Edwards-Leeper on right around the same time I had you on in 2021, I think.
One person who was all in and is now all out is Sarah Stockton. And she is a very interesting person to talk to about it. It amazes me that there aren't more people who've come out of it, but I've talked to Carol Tavris a lot about that, who wrote Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, about cognitive dissonance. And I've tried to understand why the people who were all in stay that way. And of course, they're protecting themselves from dealing with the fact that they might have harmed children. I mean, that's how the human brain works.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of those people are going to come around, not only because of having to grapple with harm they might have caused, but because there are so many lawsuits and now there are these criminal investigations. So the reason I brought all this up is that I don't know that the temporary stop is going to hold. If you're stopping with an executive orders and whoever gets in next, it's not a way of long-term resolution. We don't know how to get out of it long-term. I've been thinking a lot about the one book I read in my MFA program out of the 12 or 15 I was supposed to, which was the E.M. Forster book about that I think is called The Art of the Novel, but I forgot to look. And in it, he talks about the difference between ending and stopping. And I am previewing the end of my book, but because this is what I just finished writing. But stopping is just the story is over. But ending is it lives on after you close the book in your mind. You have some understanding. You have a bigger sense of closure. I want people to understand. I want people to understand how this happened and why so many people who think of themselves as good liberals participated in it, and how it went on so long, and how it got to the point where the only way for it to stop was with Donald Trump. And then I want to think about what we sacrificed in order to make it stop. So I don't think it's ending yet. It's stopping for now.
This was a perfect storm. And we've talked about this before on the podcast. Politically, culturally, the role of social media, the role of COVID. Can you kind of walk us through a timeline of how all these different pieces came together?
Ultimately, what happened was that we made it impossible to object, that we made objection, questioning, skepticism into a kind of blasphemy. And of course, you know the various ingredients in that, which, yes, are social media, the movement for social justice / wokeness, which became very censorious, and especially the way social media and social justice commingled to narrow us down to the oppressor and the oppressed and good or bad, black and white. And it just, in order to understand this issue, as I said in the beginning, you would have to say every democratic institution was wrong. And then you would have to also say the words that are absolutely impossible in this environment for a liberal to say, which are the Republicans are right about this. So it's not just social media, social justice, it's polarization, and it is the media really falling down on the job so that they're also presenting it in that polarized framing. The Democrats think this way, Republicans think that way. So if you're not doing that, if you're not thinking that way, then you're not a member of that tribe. And many other ingredients, but it was so deeply institutionalized so that we started teaching these ideas to preschoolers who do not have the cognitive capacity to really understand the nuances and the differences between gender stereotypes and your body, and that you're going to change. It just makes me think of the story of Avery Jackson, who was the literal poster child for the gender revolution, the cover of the 2017 National Geographic special issue about gender. And 3 years later, there's a documentary with Avery, and Avery saying, I'm tired of signing books. I don't want to have a book. I don't want to be public. And the mother is saying, well, 3 years ago, you felt differently. I mean, this is a 12-year-old kid. What 12-year-old doesn't feel differently than they feel at 9? What 53-year-old me doesn't feel differently about a lot of things than they felt a few years before? It's crazy. Maybe the craziest part about it was to imbue children with, all of the medical and psychological and philosophical wisdom, and then say you're in charge. I mean, it's gentle parenting and medicine mixed together. That's the perfect storm, maybe.
Kids know who they are has always struck me as another version of believe women, right? Like, it sounds good on the surface, but let's just really stop and think about that for a second.
Yeah, if your sex is the entire reason someone should believe you, not because you're telling the truth. And kids are, I mean, they're horrible to each other, and you're supposed to, sort of civilize them or teach them how to behave. I'm not saying that I have done that to mine, but that's what parenting is supposed to be. And again, I say this as someone who had very little parenting, and I'm not saying I've been a great parent. I'm just saying there was this vilification of the word no. It turns out to be pretty much the most important word in parenting. And we said yes to a child's self-attestation about whether or not they can know better than all of human history about what sex they are. I mean, so again, when you make skepticism verboten, when you make critical thinking verboten, then the toddlers are in charge.
Something that comes up a lot when I try to talk about this with people and you and I have talked about this, is this question of, well, how often is this really happening? What is happening? Okay, these kids can run around saying they're non-binary, whatever, but how often is medical intervention really happening? You can't possibly be telling me that minors are having surgeries. That's hysteria. Prove it. Where are the numbers, et cetera, et cetera. How do you respond to that?
It is difficult to know. It is, again, why I have always wanted to actually get the data. That would be really helpful. There have been a few analyses, Leo Sapir at the Manhattan Institute, and they ran numbers about number of people with gender dysphoria and how many people had it later. And we definitely know that minors have had surgery. Heck, it's crazy that this talking point went unchallenged for so long when we could see Jazz Jennings get bottom surgery at 17 on TLC, the Learning Channel. We all saw what happened to Jazz, which was, having no sexual function and struggling, so depressed. At times she couldn't get out of bed. Seems to be doing well now, but it's so odd that people would say this is life-saving and the children thrive and no kids are getting surgeries. And then we saw many seasons of a television program which showed the opposite of all of that.
Another thing that has happened is that because liberals were not allowed to talk about this, the Republicans have now not only won, but are gloating. They're sore winners. So we have a real ugliness around this issue. And it's so frustrating because it's like, there's no need to own the libs on this. Like the reality of the situation was so clearly in favor of questioning this in a really big way and stopping it, that there's no need to gloat and be horrible and mean to people, but that's what we're having. And that's actually making everything much worse. And when it goes back the other way, the pendulum's just going to swing even harder. How do you keep from your head exploding?
No, my head has exploded multiple times. I wasn't going to talk much about this book I've been writing because it's really needs a lot of editing, but only one person has looked at it, and that is my stepfather, who used to teach political science. And he just said it is impossible to believe that the Republicans genuinely objected to this. Now, if that's what he said after reading it, that is a problem because I need to prove many things. First, that Democrats completely abdicated all responsibility. But second, that the Republicans did not know that this was going to be a wedge issue that would win them anything when we gave it to them.
Yes.
When they started in 2018 with bathroom bills, one passed in North Carolina, and they faced the wrath for that. The governor lost his bid for re-election. All of these major sports teams were pulling out of North Carolina, boycotts. It was not popular at all. Why did they pursue it, even though it was not popular? It was not getting them any purchase anywhere. Well, it fits right in with a lot of what they hold dear. For the Christian conservatives, it goes with their, protecting the innocence of childhood and protecting gender roles. Men should not be dressed like that, and you can't change sex. So no matter what they do, they're men. I mean, it's not a big leap for a conservative or a Republican to object to this and to object to teaching these ideas in school. But it was unpopular when they started. It was only much later that they realized it could help them. And that was after communing specifically with radical feminists who, starting in, I think, 2017, went to the Heritage Foundation after trying for a couple of years to get any Democrats to give them an audience. I mean, people tried really hard to get the Democrats to take it up, and their fear was, if you don't take care of it, the Republicans will take care of it for us. And that's what happened.
I have often leaned on the framing that it's the specter of the gay rights movement. There's so much shame and guilt around conversion therapy, just all the suffering of homosexuals up until pretty recently. Let's face it. But do you think that's too simplistic? Is there more going on than just that when it comes to liberals and their inability to get their head around this?
I think white liberal shame and guilt are very powerful, and it's easy to manipulate us. I mean, if you call I don't know if I said this last time I was here, but if you call a white woman a racist, she'll just lie down in the street and you can do anything. So it's very frightening to be labeled those names if you're a liberal, because it means, it's a scarlet letter. You're out. So I think that's a big part of it, but I also think we just assumed they added T to the LGB, and a lot of us were, I got married before gay marriage was legal, and my lesbian friend performed our ceremony, and we gave a speech about, she should be able to get married, and etc. So we just assumed it was the same thing. I mean, some of it's ignorance, some of it's guilt, and some of it's shame, and some of it was the messaging of the kind of intersectionality, third wave feminism, which I was too old for. Remember when I first started saying this is partly feminists' fault, and I thought, what are you talking about? But I had missed this whole, it's not feminism unless it's trans inclusive feminism. That was not going on when I was in college. So I think that also, made I think a lot of educated upper middle class white liberals felt bad and guilty. And this is, the ritual of pronouns, etc. They're kind of ablutions, we're cleansing our souls by participating.
So I have often talked about, and you and I again have talked about this kind of, free to be you and me, 70s, second wave feminism ethos that was very much like, a girl can play with trucks and the boy can play with dolls, and that was the sort of version of an elastic gender concept that existed then. At the same time, I have spoken to people who are more conservative who do blame second wave feminism on some of this, saying like, well, actually, you guys set the stage because you kind of said that gender was a construct. Like you kind of said that men and women are the same and that it doesn't matter, and that the fact that men are more violent is socially constructed, and there's the patriarchal norms, and on and on and on and on. So it's kind of like we're kind of saying a bunch of stuff at the same time. So I wonder how you tease that out.
No, that's true. There was a certain amount of tamping down the reality of biological differences in order to promote the idea that there psychological differences are exaggerated. And they were exaggerated. There's a tremendous amount of overlap, and there were all kinds of things that women were prevented from doing under the guise of sex, that, women can't do math, and women, etc. And whether So we were denying a certain amount of the psychological and definitely the biological differences. Whether that was powerful enough, I don't know. I mean, certainly we've had massive cultural change, and among the upper classes, men do a lot more child care. I mean, I think less in lower income.
Oh, really? I don't know about that. I know a lot of working class men they're not the breadwinner. They're staying at home and they're doing a lot of the child care.
Too. Then we've got the feminization of the economy and this kind of masculinity crisis. My God, there's so much going on, and in the end, it would be so much better if we actually talked about it less, at least with children. I think, again, this little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. I mean, I just see all of us picking out what we want because it's so complicated, and you can find, oh yeah, it's second wave feminists' fault, it's third wave feminists' fault. The men and women really are psychologically different, so we shouldn't, never mind all the funding for women in STEM. Oh, but actually they would stay more, and they did make it if we had universal childcare. I mean, it could just go on forever. It's everybody's fault. We're all to blame.
There was a story in the news recently that I know you wrote a post on your Substack. And I also thought this is, kind of interesting in that head exploding kind of way. There's a male cheerleader. Was it on a professional football team or a college team? Okay. Well, maybe this is part of it.
Minnesota Vikings.
Minnesota Vikings. Okay.
Yeah.
So this was a guy, amazing dancer, very talented dancer. He should really just be doing music videos or something instead of this gig, but okay. And the people on the political right start going like, oh, look, a trans, this is a part of the trans debate. And this person is like, somehow this should not be acceptable. Forgetting that like what we and arguably they have been saying for a long time is that you shouldn't need to transition. People are fine how they are. Like they're completely contradicting themselves and not realizing it. And it's maddening because if you really actually cared about this issue, this kid, it's great. I mean, this kid might have been transitioned had he come from another set of circumstances, but instead he is a male doing this stuff.
There are two of them. One of them looks like he's had a lot of plastic surgery, but you know what? Looks hot.
Okay. Oh, there's two of them. Sorry, I missed that part. Okay.
There are 12 teams, I think, with male cheerleaders in the NFL. They've been there since 2008. I did not know how many of them do the male part, but this is what people were upset about. They were dancing like women.
Okay.
Actually, people were mad for all different kinds of reasons. So there were what struck me was the gender critical crowd or the gender resistance crowd being upset about it. And so, if a conservative is mad about a very feminine looking man on a cheerleading squad doing the same steps and not being the male cheerleader that hoists the cheerleader up to do a twirl off the podium of his outstretched palms, that is unsurprising. But I saw a lot of people in this kind of gender resistance, as I call it, being upset. And they were mad because these men were taking women's jobs, which I found odd because cheerleading is not a woman's job. And there have always been men in cheerleading, including past U.S. presidents.
Ronald Reagan was a cheerleader, was he not?
He was. And maybe they weren't twerking, although also nobody was twerking in Reagan's day. But yes, maybe they were playing a more traditional role. But I don't follow cheerleading. I don't know how out of the ordinary this is. These were men, being gender nonconforming men, being out there feminine men. And ostensibly, if I'm in any kind of tribe, it's the two sexes, infinite personalities tribe. The Nina Paley greatest quote of all time, sex is real, people are weird. Okay. Now, I guess there was a caveat that I didn't know about that said, but just don't put them in front of my face. They can be weird, but I don't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, too bad. There are two men twerking on the Vikings cheerleading squad. And the best possible response would have been, oh, well, right? If you don't like it, then whatever. And if you like it, oh, that's cool. To me, it was a test of all of the people who say, I object to the imposition of gender identity in law and policy, but I accept gender nonconformity. It was a test of, can we implement that in our culture? And here we have the biggest opportunity we've ever had to prove that we could, because the NFL is the most watched TV in America. Here was our opportunity to say, no, we really are liberals, but we object to this and it doesn't make us a conservative. And well, I think we failed.
You're talking about the gender critical feminists, this particular portion of it, because you consider yourself a gender critical feminist. I mean, I would see ourselves, broadly, well, I mean, if that has been the term of art for the people who are pushing back on transing kids. So I don't know if that definition has been refined.
It's very annoying, but I am there are very few labels that I've felt comfortable with. I liked the heterodox thing because it just meant I don't subscribe to any one ideology other than those tenets that I liked of, intellectual curiosity. I'm not saying, or, humility, being interested in other points of view. That's who I'd like to be. I'm not saying that's who I am. But people have labeled me a gender critical feminist, but I don't think you have to have that label to have been part of this group that was saying, we want to make room for lots of different kind of people. In fact, we want to make room for these feminine boys and masculine girls to not feel like they have to transition. Right. And I think it was more than gender critical feminists who were trying to assert that.
Yeah.
Well, great. In which case, thumbs up. Now, do we have to celebrate it? No. But we could just say, for all the little boys out there who are for Jazz Jennings to have been able to see that,
yeah,
maybe Jazz would have a penis now.
I know you don't want to talk about AGP, but I think we need to for a minute because, okay, if we are saying that it's reductive to say, okay, you can be anything you want, but, just keep it private. And if people like you and I are saying, no, don't keep it private, be yourself. Let's have people out there that are good examples for kids who might otherwise be pressured or facilitated into a transition. We do have this subset of trans-identified biological men who fall into this category that's been called Autogynephilia. And there's a lot of debate about their relationship to the outside world and their interaction with people.
That goes also back to the little bit of knowledge, because I hear so many people saying they're all perverts and they're all horrible and, they hate women. And there are all kinds of people who have those inclinations.
And sorry, we should define autogynephilia in case anybody doesn't know. Why don't you define it?
Well, it was a clinical grouping named by a sexologist and psychologist named Ray Blanchard, who was working at a gender clinic in Toronto in the 80s, I believe. And as he was interviewing all these people all these males who wanted to transition, he noticed these common narratives and that essentially they were aroused, erotically aroused in some way by thinking of themselves as a woman, which would range from cross-dressing, just wanting to wear the clothes of the opposite sex, to, desperately wanting to change their bodies to mimic the phenotype of women. And he estimated that 80% of trans women were AGPs. I mean, who knows now? And this is very verboten because for a lot of autogynephiles, the fantasy of becoming a woman is so important that if you say, no, you're a man and I accept you as a man wanting to look this way, well, then the fantasy can't continue. And so they might be very hostile about that.
Mm-hmm.
But not all of them, because many of them understand who they are and why they want what they want. And if they're honest about it, then it's a lot easier to figure out how to navigate the world. If they're not, and they're saying, no, I'm a woman like any other, and I deserve membership in the category, and I'm a biological woman because I'm a man, because, I'm a biological entity and I feel like a woman, it's much harder. And just there are so many examples of women being terrorized by men, since we've kind of moved into self-ID, in which you can opt into a category by speaking it, which is also very religious, kind of manifesting by speaking it. The women who had to change with Leah Thomas in the locker room, some of whom had been sexually assaulted, and there were women changing.
In the past, just to be clear, not by Leah Thomas. Yes, just very, very
right,
clear there.
I'm just saying, I mean, they're the 80-something-year-old woman banned from a YMCA for saying there's a man in the locker room. I mean, the women raped in prison by men identifying as women and getting pregnant. I mean, and it's very sad that we have, so many examples, but nothing matters. I mean, you had asked before how many kids are there. We don't know, but I don't understand why we need more than we have for there to be a problem. How many women have to lose to a man in the sports before we deal with reality? How many women have to be raped it's not to say that all autogynephiles are predators. It's to say that we created a policy that opened the door to a lot of terrible things happen, and they really happened.
Mm-hmm.
So now what?
I remember a New York Times story about a female murderer. There had been this very grisly murder, and it was a woman. And I was like, wow, that's weird. I remember seeing the headline, and I remember reading the story. And it was like at the bottom of the article, the second to last paragraph, it mentioned that this person had transitioned. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. You are a journalist. You pitch a lot of articles. You deal with editors. You deal with book editors, newspaper editors, magazine editors. Why do you think there is so much resistance on the part of media professionals? Why does a story like that end up in the New York Times in that way?
Well, there has been a tremendous imposition of advocacy groups' desires and their own style guides onto the media. Apparently, the New York Times did not get a training from the Trans Journalists Association, but many media organizations have. I attended a national press club event that was put on with the Trans Journalists Association. I attended a Pointer event that's a journalism group, right? The Pointer
journalism
Institute. Group that claims to be the premier fact-checking organization in America. And these trainings were how to report on trans issues. And the way that they told people to report on trans issues was to make it completely one-sided, to frame everything as left or right, to dismiss any conflicting scientific reports. I mean, they have been trained in opinion journalism as reporting. And then you find the reporting in the opinion journalism. You know, you found the reporting in Pamela Paul's columns in the New York Times.
But those were on the opinion page.
They were on the opinion page. Plus, she got let go for reasons I still don't know. So,
okay. So another thing you will hear is that the reason there's so much aggression around these kinds of initiatives is because these are biological males who, even if they're trans identified now, they are just very aggressive. The reason this whole movement is so aggressive, often violent and threatening, is because it is propelled by not just men, biological men, but this of a certain psychological profile. Is that too simplistic of a framing?
I was messaging with someone who is very, very much in the kind of affirmative camp and is a well-known journalist at a certain institution. And almost everything I could say, look at the women who've been, look at these death threats. This person could show me the same thing from the other side. Look at these death threats to trans women.
Death threats coming from who? Like crazy people on Twitter or?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
Same thing.
Okay.
Most.
Okay, so sorry, just to be clear, so the death threats to the death threats to the women who speak up are coming from like avatars on Twitter, but they're also coming from people we know. But women who speak out, they don't only get death threats; it's career suicide, right?
Suicide and the rape. I mean, I don't know how many trans women have received a note or a tweet from an actual woman that say, "I want to cut your head off and rape your bleeding neck." I don't know if it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not condoning any of it. And I don't want to, it is, in general, I think it is scarier for a woman to receive these kind of threats from a man. If we're now dealing in biological reality, the complexity of it. And I get that so many people in this resistance, gender identity resistance, have been treated horribly, including us. I mean, our lives change from speaking up, right? I mean, but I still want to behave myself, which I struggle with. I don't want to threaten people I disagree with.
Oh, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the preponderance of AGP biological males in this movement.
Yes. But I guess what I'm saying is, there have been a lot of them who've said horrible things and have actually, I've seen videos of women actually getting hurt. But I'm saying that the vitriol is coming from all sides, and I just don't know what good it's doing anyone. I keep thinking, when you asked liberals 7 years ago, do you support trans rights? They were like, yeah, of course. It's the new gay. Years later, when you drilled down on what that meant, do you support biological males on women's teams? Do you support putting men in women's prisons? Do you support teaching every child that they can choose their sex? Do you support performing, genital surgeries on people under 18? Or should a depressed 13-year-old girl get a double mastectomy when there's no evidence to show that it's medically necessary? then they start to say no. And what I have focused on is giving them the information so they can say no. And yet, somebody showed me an email today from a parent of a trans kid. So someone who's somewhat prominent who has spoken up, and she showed me this email. And of course, this person blames her. Look what you've done by empowering Trump with these subpoenaing these records from these gender clinics and getting all of our personal information. And now we're going to have to flee the country. And of course, the individuals who speak up are not responsible for this situation. The people who are responsible for it are the ones who did not listen to those of us who spoke up.
Mm-hmm.
But these families feel terrorized, and I'm starting to think that they are being terrorized.
By whom?
By the Trump administration. I mean, I go making it a criminal when every institution supported it. Again, this isn't what I was going for. I was going for permission to object.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as this is what's happening, I still think there are so many millions of people who maybe after the last election were starting to grapple with what role did this play in us ceding the country to Trump? And maybe I can change my mind. And right now we can't reach those people.
Right. And I mean, just in case anybody is scratching their head, I think there's pretty good evidence that Trump campaign ad, Kamala Harris is for they, them, Trump is for you, really did move the needle. That was a pretty 11th hour advertisement, and it was profoundly effective. What is a family of a trans kid supposed to do, though? And, are they going to lose necessary medical treatment? I mean, it's become necessary at this point if the child is taking cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers, et cetera. What are they supposed to do?
Some places will have grandfather clauses, I hope, so that the kids can still get hormones. Because if they have, and I'm sure it's not, a huge number of people, but if they no longer have gonads, they can't make hormones, and you've got to have some kind of hormones, or your body can't function very well without some kind of sex hormones. I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to feel like victims. They're going to feel terrorized. Their children are going to either be forced to detransition or they'll leave. They'll leave the country, I guess. Or they'll do what people used to do, get it on the black market,
Mm-hmm.
find a workaround. I don't know how all those places like Folks, all the online, this is a good question to look into. Can you just get it the way you used to get it? If it's a place that doesn't accept any federal money, maybe you can just still get it. But I don't know how many doctors are going to be willing to risk the potentially being investigated for providing it. It would be really, really nice to figure out how to help those families, especially to think about the exit ramps for those families. How can those people who some of them had that same little feeling of, I'm not sure this is the right thing, what can they do? How can they help their child adjust to coming back from where they were to living in reality? How can they reckon with what they did, with what they supported, with doing the wrong thing in the name of doing the right thing? We really have to grapple with that. And I don't think the Trump administration is the one to do it. Now, the people who could do it, I guess, are the people in the kind of gender resistance movement who are the people you were talking about, who were kind of like, I don't like Trump, but I felt this was necessary. And the Democrat, nobody was doing anything. Nobody was even admitting there was a problem. There are a lot of holes that need patching. I'd like to see people step up again to fill in this space with understanding. You know, if you want to come around to, I did something wrong, you know, that is so difficult for the most humans to admit. So how are we going to create an environment for that? And how are we going to support those people and like welcome them over here? And the rhetoric we use is not very welcoming.
Yeah. Is this affecting only people under 18? Like how is this affecting adults, the Trump policies?
Well, I mean, all the trans adults are kicked out of the military. Now, what they mean by trans adults, I have no idea, because I don't even know what is trans, you know.
Okay.
So when they
trans-identified.
No, but I mean, what are they saying when you say no transgender people in the military? Are you saying people who are just like autogynephiles wearing pink underwear or under their uniform? Are you talking about people who medically transitioned? Are you talking about people who had vaginoplasty and they have to dilate every day so they can't perform their jobs? Or are you just talking about a woman who uses they them pronouns? I have no idea. But yeah, it affects lots of adults in different ways. And of course, this whole time, you know, the idea that you turn 18 and all of this should just be available to you no matter what is a problem also, because it's not like you're magically ready to be an adult. I mean, maybe it should be 45. I don't know.
Well, people have said at least 25. Supposedly your brain is finished developing then. But I actually want to understand this. But, you know, okay, going into the military, things like, you know, what it says on your driver's license, that kind of thing. Although, you know, if we've established that maybe you should have your real sex on your, if not, you know, your driver's license, important papers, medical records. But in terms of actually getting the medical maintenance treatment that they need, is that threatened by these policies?
Yeah, some hospitals are no longer, some clinics are no longer serving adults as well. So that is shutting down. And I think that the document question is really interesting, and even the bathroom question. You know, if you are a female and you transition and you pass and your license has an F, I mean, maybe it should have an F to M. I don't know. But what's going to happen when you get pulled over and you have a full beard and you just look completely like a man and you hand them this card, or you travel to another country and you turn over your passport? You know, we have to reckon with what happened for the past 10 years with huge surge in supply of gender medicine. We don't even know how many people partook of it, but we also increased the demand by teaching people that if they felt uncomfortable with their bodies, they probably were a different sex instead of you're probably a human being. And we have to deal with the creation of the demand and not just cut off the supply. We also have to deal with the people who partook of it. And I don't have answers about how to deal with it, but I do know that we should be having the discussion, and that the people, the decision-making apparatus is not including a lot of people who want to focus on that. Now, they want to stop. They've listened to the stories of the people who got hurt, and they got really hurt. These young girls, you know, with no breasts.
You're talking about the detransitioners.
I'm talking about detransitions or people who experience medical harm but can't detransition because they will never pass as their actual sex. They have experienced so much medical and psychological harm. And it makes sense to want to stop that from happening to anybody else. But the level of harm in itself is quite nuanced, and we still have to deal with that. And we also have to deal with the people, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, who transitioned happily. They're out there too, and they've got driver's licenses and passports too, and they have to go to the bathroom. And yeah, this is why it's complicated, and this is why it was heavily policed and allowed only for a tiny number of people who could pass and not tip the balance. But we open those gates, and I really want to figure out how to deal with where we are now, not just where we want to be.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I just have so much admiration for the way you handle this subject. So thank you for all that you have done and are continuing to do. And
without you.
Well, we should say that you're going to be part of our Unspeakeasy weekend in October, the small gathering for big ideas. We have a number of speakers, and you are among them. I think we're going to do some kind of gender panel. We're going to cover all sorts of subjects with these various speakers, but we're definitely going to talk about that. I'm sure quite a bit. And that's October 11th and 12th for anybody. I think we are about at capacity, but if anyone wants to try to slide in there, they can get in touch. Where can we find you? What do we need to know about your work?
Well, first, I just want to say again, Meghan, that first of all, you were the one who told me I was writing a book when I didn't even know I was writing one, because I desperately wanted to write a book about this and tried for years. And then I did the Substack, and you said, oh, no, but you're actually doing it a little bit on the side every day. And you allowed me to speak up when, however many years ago. And I'm just forever grateful to you, and also a giant fan of your writing.
Wow.
So my Substack is broadview.news, and I'll have a book next year.
You do a podcast too.
I've been doing a podcast called Informed Dissent with people I don't always agree with.
Okay, well, that sounds like a podcast. Lisa, thank you as always. And I'll see you in October. And of course, you'll come back on the podcast before too long.
Thank you, Meghan. See you in October.
That was my interview with writer and journalist Lisa Selin Davis. You can look out for her book about the new gender movement coming out sometime in the next year, hopefully. I cannot wait for it. In the meantime, you can visit her Substack, which is called Broadview. Check the various links in the show notes. Again, Lisa will be part of our Unspeakeasy Small Gathering for Big Ideas weekend. This is a co-ed retreat in New York City, October 11th and 12th. It is at capacity, but if you want to get on the waiting list, you can go to theunspeakeasy.com/NYC. I will be back next week with another super nuanced guest. Thanks for listening. See you then.